Hello, welcome everybody to Designing for the End. Thank you so much for making time to join us today for our first official gathering of Data Science Grand Challenge grantees as part of Learning Lab's onboarding program, Learning Lab 101. I'm Jamie Galvin, manager of the Data Science Grand Challenge and special projects at the Learning Lab. And joining me from the Learning Lab team today are Marisa Chung, Deputy Director of Administration and Sustainability, Gwen Lay, Program Officer, and Lily Kwan, Program Specialist. Also on the call with us today, and the stars of the show, are our friends from WestEd, and they will introduce themselves shortly. WestEd is not only recognized as a leading nonprofit in educational research, but they know Learning Lab's work and our priorities through our work together over the past couple of years. We're thrilled to continue working with WestEd for project evaluation support, as well as an overall evaluation of the Learning Lab program. We will keep you updated on all the opportunities to engage with WestEd, including future webinars and one-on-one or small group technical assistance. Today's interactive webinar is intended to share practical advice for assessing if your evaluation design reflects your anticipated outcomes, monitoring progress towards your goals, and making improvements throughout the duration of your project. We realize that all of the data science projects vary widely in nature and scope, and that folks come with different levels of evaluation experience. We hope that everyone feels comfortable today to really engage with the content and ask questions. Last couple notes, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared next week as a helpful resource along with the slides. I also just want to encourage anyone who may find it helpful to enable live transcription. And you can do that by going to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, clicking the More icon, and then clicking Live Transcript. Let me know if you need any help with that. And with no further ado, I will turn it over to WestEd.
Thanks so much, Jamie and the Learning Lab team. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session focused on project evaluation, designing for the end. We are really happy to be here with you on this Friday afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Burr, and my colleagues and I are researchers and evaluators from WestEd, like Jamie said. And WestEd is a nonpartisan research, development, and service agency whose mission is to work with partners from education and communities to promote excellence, achieve equity, and improve learning for children, youth, and adults. On the next slide, I'm just going to introduce my colleagues. I know there's a lot of boxes on the screen, so we may not be visible to you, but I'm here with my colleague Reno and Lisa Lefevre and Beth Hart. So on the next slide are our session goals. We have two main goals that guide our time and session today, time together in session today. And these goals include sharing practical advice for assessing evaluation design as related to your intended results, and centering evaluation around learning and continuous improvement. So before we begin, we wanted to get a sense of your familiarity and experience with program evaluation. And so we wonder, how experienced and knowledgeable are you with program evaluation methods? And I want you to know that all answers are welcome. We're going to do a little poll right now to assess your understanding. Okay, should I stop there, Jamie, do you think?
Yeah.
It doesn't look like, oh wait, there is someone that I can hand over the mic. Who is that? Okay, maybe not, but we're thrilled that someone else could give this presentation another time. So with that, that's really helpful to know and will help us tailor our remarks. So thank you. The next slide is about the approach to. Sorry, I have something popped up on my screen. This slide is about the approach to our webinar today. That is an active learning approach, and we both the agenda and the activities for our next 90 minutes together are to discover and understand the why and the what of one type of evaluation, process evaluation, including learning how process evaluation is carried out and the elements that it includes. So this includes exploring and discussing examples of key elements presented and providing resources that you can tap into later to extend the learning after today. We really hope that the information that is shared today can provide some helpful knowledge that can be contextualized to your individual projects with implications for how you might track, evaluate, and learn from the projects as time evolves. Are there any questions before I hand it over to Lisa? Please jump in now and throughout this webinar. We really want it to be not a presentation, but very active, like we said, and we welcome your comments and interruptions in the chat or live as you wish. Okay, great. Thank you. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Welcome, everybody. We're very happy to see you here. We're very happy to continue following efforts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the why of process evaluation. Why have we chosen to talk about it today? Let me situate this by saying that what we're doing is for you to think about how to do your work. It's focused on self-evaluations of your own work rather than process evaluation writ large of a program. So again, all here to help you. All right, so why process evaluation? What are its benefits? Raino, next slide, please. There are various terms that you should know that are used and definitions for process evaluations. So you might see these. They all fall within formative evaluation. It's also called implementation evaluation at times, with implementation and processes sometimes interchangeable. So you'll see that noted. All definitions have key tenets related to process evaluation purposes. So that's understanding if an effort was conducted as planned. In other words, it promotes evaluation assessment vis-a-vis intended plans and outcomes. And we're going to be talking more about that throughout this session. There are some key benefits to process evaluation. These include understanding what worked or didn't. There's always learning in what didn't, and how for both the project and those participating within it, under what conditions and why. So learning for all the different components involved. Next slide. And I think throughout this session too, I'll just say Elizabeth will be popping in some resources. So we had a resource there that she'll pop into chat. Slides will be available later and you can find those resources in the notes too. Now, what is process evaluation? Again, process evaluation, hold on, sorry, I think I went backwards. What goes into process evaluation? Key procedures and elements that go into process evaluation, many of which you might be familiar with already, but which we'll go over in more detail, include developing a logic model and an evaluation plan, establishing processes, measures and progress monitoring, and documenting and contextualizing findings. For the latter element, we'll concentrate on understanding implications from findings.
Lisa, what slide are you on? I just want to make sure I'm right.
You went forward a little bit, so
I'm sorry, yeah, I
just
want to make sure I'm on the right side. I think I went too far forward.
Yeah, that's okay, but we're fine here anyway. Yeah, that's great.
Good. Sorry about that.
That's great. Hang on a second here, Raino. I think we got out of sync now. We really got out of sync. Okay. All right. So yes, why is it important, right? So it's important because the evaluation findings and learnings that it can support, it can help scale efforts, for example. It could help with replicability. We've got a key quote here from Mark Schneider, who is director of IES. This was from a blog post that he had some time ago, that the education sciences don't have a replication crisis since we don't replicate anything. So let's keep this in mind. We're working to fix this with a growing emphasis on replication of findings to accelerate evidence and what works for whom, under what conditions. Again, your work is important, and I'm sure we're all in it to see where it can go and to grow efforts. So that's part of this process too, right? Next slide. Now we're on the what of process evaluation. What about it? What does it involve? So I think we started some of this, but let me repeat this a little bit. You know, it follows how an efforts process and or its implementation plays out from original plans and through activities to outcomes. Elizabeth popped in there a resource, which is from the Kellogg Foundation. It helps us understand if a strategy, initiative, or program is being implemented as planned. You can crosswalk a logic model, which we're going to talk more about as a key resource. Are things going according to process? That's what we're looking for. It assesses if intended outputs are being produced, identifies any weaknesses or strengths, both of which you will have key learnings from. Again, that question, what worked well and what didn't work well. And finally, it helps to inform any adjustments along the way. This is part of that formative approach and very important to it because it's all about continuous improvement, another topic we're also going to talk about. Some key things that go into the development process. Next slide. There we go. It's really developing a logic model and creating an evaluation plan. These help ground our work. It's not the plan itself, but it gives us the opportunities to discuss, to take a look at the approaches we're going to go with. It establishes processes for measures against processes and progress monitoring. Also, it helps with documenting and contextualizing findings to really understand what are the implications and how can the implications we found inform improvements going forward. So I'm going to stop here and present the next slides to Reno, who's going to continue with the theory of change and logic model.
Okay, and we know a lot of you guys have really focused on this work already. And this goal of today is really to support you as you think about tracking what you're doing. And a lot of you have already encountered and engaged with logic models to try to create a foundation for your work and think about the story that your project's going to tell in advance. So today's session, we're kind of giving these 15 or 20 minutes at the front. We're going to break off and then have about 20 minutes of discussion about your work. We'll talk a little bit more about continuous improvement, and then we'll talk again. So it's really a chance for those of you on the call to be able to interact, that you've already started this thinking, but to interact and refine that thinking with some of these tools that we present. Please take care in the chat. We have a lot of the tools and the bibliography on the chat that we think can be really helpful as you go on that journey with your Learning Lab colleagues as sort of supports for your reporting. And then with us as an external monitoring partner who can help you kind of think or to ask the right questions as you go upon and think about self-evaluating yourself and self-assessing and sort of self-reflecting on how well things are going. So this is more to be supportive of you. And we know you started on this journey. So hopefully these tools can be infused into your work and support you as you go, rather than dictating you what you have to do, really giving you a toolbox that you can work from and pick tools as needed. But I think the important thing to think about for this section is that thinking and centering around evaluation around learning. You want to be learning as you're doing, so you want to be making adjustments. Because if things get a little off track, you want to be able to learn that early through your progress monitoring and then make adjustments to try and achieve the outcomes that you've set forth already in your work. Now, a couple of these terms get thrown around a little bit and get interspersed, like theory of action, theory of change, logic model. Now, a theory of change tends to precede program development and helps to determine the best intervention for desired outcomes and why, sort of causally, why these activities create the outcomes they will. There's a theory. It's more of an academic theory understanding. A logic model is sort of after the program has been developed. It's a way of thinking about the story of the program going from start through implementation, through early outcomes, short-term outcomes, medium-term outcomes, and long-term outcomes to really help you think about what you, in advance, to foresee what you see as the steps of the program and the progress that's going to be made. And then you can use that as a foundation for your evaluation plan, your reporting, and your reflection. Kind of hang your hangers onto that as kind of the core foundation and benchmark for what you want to aspire to, and then track how you're doing using the logic model. It's really not beyond that. It's telling the story. You can use it to develop an evaluation plan that has a little more details. It connects your work to expected outcomes. And there are a lot of these out there. I think you probably have a lot of seen different designs, theories of action or logic models. There are a lot of different examples to choose from. They all have, but they should all include key project elements, indicators, goals, and measures for those goals to get to the outcomes you're looking for. This is an example from the Colorado Computer Science, Colorado Learning and Identity Collaborative, the theory of change. So you can see sort of the context, the change levers, the models. It's from McGraw International. You've seen models like this. These are just examples. You have an example and a template that's been provided by the Learning Lab, and that's one to work from. The point of these slides is to say there's a lot of different ways to organize this thinking, but the key is to really get your thinking down on paper early on and then use it to develop and self-reflect and self-assess your work as you go about it. So the basic pieces underlying the logic model work is the problem statement, the issue you're addressing, fundamental topic, and then resources or inputs you're going to use, activities, what are you going to do? Outputs are really evidence of early implementation. Are you going to produce products early on? Are you going to have a series of trainings early on? Did you produce those? Did you do those things? And then which outcomes will be achieved? So the really thing is specifying each of these elements and thinking about them with the team to get some consensus around how you want to work together and really set the stage for what your program is going to do. And I bring this out. I really want to pop the resource into the chat for this. This is drawn from a recent resource from our Regional Educational Laboratory West colleagues, funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, who really tried to delineate a lot of this thinking and lay out the reasons for it. And I like this sort of template out there because I really like the row at the top. It sort of lays out what the purpose of a logic model is, or really the logic behind the logic model. I mean, if you have certain resources in place, which you delineate, and you do these things, which you delineate clearly, you'll generate certain evidence of implementation, certain products, certain deliverables, activities, results of activities, evidence of outcomes, outputs from activities. You'll then achieve these changes in knowledge and skills, which are your short-term outcomes. Generally, 6 to 12 months is the short-term outcome space that we're talking about, the most immediate and measurable results, which then shape behaviors and practices. So that's your medium-term outcomes, generally 12 months to 2 years, 12 to 24 months is a way to think about that. A little more distant, but they are anticipated, and they will be sort of behavioral and practice changes that result from the changes in knowledge and skills. And then you see the systemic changes after 2 years, which are ultimately desiring to look for. So I think this document from REL is a really good guiding framework. It talks about the data that you can collect as you do this, but I think that's really sort of the basic logic behind the logic models to help you lay out a story, such as the top row. And then you can use that story in your reporting and tracking as you do the work that you're doing. So then what you do is you track the arrows in that logic model. If I go back on slot, so these are all connected. There's arrows from each of the top rows to the next set of columns. That's what you want to track. Did that connection to the next column happen? And then do we know? Do we know that these activities led to these outputs? Can we measure that? Did these outputs lead to short-term outcomes? Can we track that? Did the short-term outcomes lead to medium-term outcomes? How can we measure that? That's sort of the evaluation plan that gets built from the logic model, is tracking the connections between these different columns, between these areas of work. And then it becomes a lot about how do you measure this? How do you go from a logic model to thinking about measuring and monitoring what you're doing and trying to contextualize your findings? So a lot of what we're going to talk about throughout the rest of the day is around measurement and tracking what you're doing. But we're going to keep it in sort of the outcome space right now and talk a little bit about the practicalities of measurement. So really you want, like I said before, you want to measure the connections and the relationships between the columns, between the sections of the logic model. That'll help you draw inferences about whether your anticipated story is actually playing out the way you thought about it. And in doing so, you want to think about a couple key tenets about your data collection in order to be able to understand whether your story is a valid one that you've laid forth. Now, you want to use multiple sources of data so you can sort of triangulate around the truth if as it exists. Maybe you use qualitative data and quantitative data. You also want to learn baseline data. What did you know about the population of interest, the students you were treating before the program was implemented? And what was their status then? And from comparison groups who didn't receive the program. And when you do these things, when you think about these things, about their precondition, the addition of comparison groups, can you use existing data sets? I think we're all confronted with burden of survey fatigue, more data collections to people who are very busy right now. You really want to try and avoid that, but there are a lot of data out there that you can use. I know folks have institutional research groups in their universities or IHEs that they can collaborate with to do this, to leverage existing data they already have, so you don't have to create a new data collection. And that can build on existing capacity. Are the patterns and timings ultimately observed in the data consistent with the logic model expectations you had set forth in your story? That's sort of the goal of the evaluation. That's how the evaluation plan gets built. And I think when we're talking really about the baseline and the comparison group, it's really about trying to understand the counterfactual. What would have happened if this program didn't exist? So you're trying to think, baseline is one way of thinking about that. What it can you use sort of within a person at this set of time, they had this particular set of outcomes. Over time, did their knowledge and skills change? So that's the sort of the pre-post is side of thinking about a counterfactual, with the pre-measure being the counterfactual, the post-measure. It's a little bit limited in that you really want to think about another comparison group that's comparable to the set of treatment individuals, people who took part in the program. People are comparable, but on every set of variables except the program participation. And then you can measure those two groups and compare the outcomes for those two groups. Ideally, you'd have a baseline assessment of those two groups. They're equivalent at the baseline, and then you measure the amount of change in those two groups. And that's a way to sort of make a judgment as you think about what you're doing. Sometimes this is challenging, but it's just a way of sort of framing the sort of the desired outcome we want from a lot of these evaluations in order to make judgments about what you contributed to and the types of change you contributed to and really affected through your program. So it's sort of trying to bring sort of this evaluation thinking into it in a way that's viable, that works for you, but also tries to address some of these issues that tend to be challenging when a lot of people tell just descriptive stories of their program. We had these folks, here's what they did. We don't have a pretest, we didn't have a comparison group, but we have a real good, strong narrative. It's a little bit stronger if we at the front end think about, can we get a baseline assessment? Can we get a comparison group? It'll really help us tell our story in different ways. And so that's the kind of the adjustments that are being advocated on this slide, and the kind of things we want to coach folks to think through as you embark on this journey. And so next is moving into our group discussion. So breaking into our breakout groups, we're going to have 5 breakout groups. You're going to be with about 7 or 8 people in your breakout group. These are generally thinking about your outcomes. I think we specified the timing for each of these, 6 to 12 months for your short term, medium term, 12 to 24 months, long term after 2 years. And then how did you establish these? You really want to have people sharing ideas. One thing that Lisa and I learned last year when we were at the summit, in the Inspire Summit for the Learning Lab, was when we got folks together in a workshop, they really, really wanted to talk to one another about their work and get feedback on their work and be able to share their ideas with colleagues. So we're going to have 20 minutes now to really do that and share your thinking about measurement. It's really designed to be an open conversation. These prompts are simply that. They're simply prompts to get people talking. So we're not going to record in the breakout sessions. It's designed to be an open conversation, but we'll ideally have 20 minutes to talk about the outcomes, how you got to them, and the kind of measurement you're thinking about as you track them over time. Thanks. So we're going to shift now from that discussion of sort of, I know in my breakout discussion, a lot of it was just sort of like what we're doing and sort of what we're targeting for the next 12 to 18 months, what we're really working on. Well, how do you learn in those next 18 months while it's happening and try to make adjustments when they're needed? If things aren't going exactly as you anticipated, are there ways to learn from and make adjustments to that to improve? That's really, it can become under the umbrella of continuous improvement, which sometimes kind of can be its own umbrella term, be very intimidating, but it's really about thinking about how you can use data to reflect and adjust what you're doing and track monitor what you're doing. I think folks think about a sort of evaluation as something, okay, that's on the end, we make a judgment about how well things went at the end of something. We really want to focus, one of the key tenets and takeaways from today is really thinking about evaluation as a formative process. It's simply trying to track and understand what you're doing, reflect on what you're doing, and make adjustments to improve your work and what you're learning for kids and faculty that you're working with. This guidance can be helpful. I hope that the resources that you get today will be helpful. We hope the discussions will be helpful, but please do use those resources. We've drawn from them as best we can. And we'll be putting more in the chat for this discussion. So with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Beth Hart, and she's going to talk a little bit about continuous improvement and how that can be really brought into and wrangled with in your work and really hopefully benefit the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Reno. And as Reno mentioned, you'll have access to this PowerPoint presentation after a meeting today. And we have a couple slides with references and recommended resources. So all this information is pulled from those resources. So basically, as Reno mentioned, what we're talking about is feedback loops and how to introduce that into your work. And I want to start by introducing the kind of premise underlying continuous improvement. And all of the folks in my group were talking about these kind of multi-system collaborations. And so we know that you're working at the level of trying to make a systemic change to how STEM pathways function between community colleges and four-year colleges. And so this slide is really about how continuous improvement can aid in that effort of making a sustainable change. So to the first bullet, we just want to acknowledge that making these big systemic changes does take time and involves collective effort. And that's why these tools like logic modeling and some continuous improvement tools that I'll introduce in a few minutes can really support colleges in making sustainable change. The second point is that all of the programs that you're implementing are context specific, and they're going to require constant adaptation. So in order to make appropriate adaptations, we want to provide some tools that can help with a process of kind of constant data gathering and learning so that colleges can adapt. So this is a framework for continuous improvement, is really a framework for real-time learning. And to the last point, we know that institutional change doesn't happen overnight. Continuous improvement is an iterative process. So you're going to go through multiple iterations of kind of planning and implementing and gathering data and making change to accumulate, smaller changes over time to accumulate into a broader systemic change. So the main takeaway from this slide is that continuous improvement can really be a framework to help support you and help in this collective effort for you and your teams. And the next slide, we really get into what is continuous improvement. So what we mean by continuous improvement, and you may have heard other terms like improvement science, quality improvement, performance management, all of these represent the same kind of practices and philosophies that we're talking about today. And so to the first point, continuous improvement is a systemic and cyclical process. It's going to be a set of tools that can support you, the key players, in working on a specific problem of practice. That's your kind of problem statement or motivation that you listed out in your logic model. To the third point here, it's really a cycle of identifying a change practice, testing it through the process of collecting data, and then refining how you're implementing over time. So one common continuous improvement model is called Plan, Do, Study, Act. You may be familiar with this. I just want to recognize that this might be a review for some of you, but just for some level setting, thinking about planning, like identifying the needs and defining the problem, implementing the change practice, studying, collecting evidence, generating evidence, and acting, making improvements or adjusting the scale or the scope or the spread of a particular strategic change over time. So I know these are kind of on this is kind of like high level theory to get you started. On the next slide, we're going to turn to a couple specific templates that are common in thinking through this kind of work. And like Reno mentioned, like none of this is a requisite. This is all just a suite of tools that you can explore and use if it works well for you. On the left side, what we have is a fishbone diagram. And that's really a tool for defining what your problem is and getting a better understanding of your problem statement and motivating the need for your strategic change. So you'll see the blue circle on the bottom that says factors. Those are the issues that contribute to the problem. And then the green circle with the 3, that's causes. What are the potential reasons, the mechanisms that are undergirding those factors? So it's really getting a better understanding of your specific problem and then motivating the need for the strategic change that you're making at the college. So that's one tool. Let's see how it kind of looks like a fishbone. The tool on the right-hand side is called a driver diagram. And that's basically listing out the different levels of drivers that might affect the problem that you're studying. So primary drivers are like what kind of conditions are essential for making the change happen. Secondary drivers are like other leverage points. It's like what are the things that affect the primary drivers? And then that informs the change practices, the specific interventions. So these are just two examples of two commonly used visual templates. I also mentioned plan, study, act, plan, study, PSDA, plan, do, study, act. And that's another, again, these are referenced in the materials that we're sharing with you all. I just want to take a beat before we get into some more specific strategies that you can use to gather data and specific types of evidence. Reno, do you want to layer on to anything I've said, or are there any clarifying questions from anybody?
No, I don't have much to add. I think this section is really, we're talking more about measurement and thinking about tracking what you're doing. And that's what we're going to lead to in the breakout. So a lot of this is going to be tool-based, really practice and tool-based around measurement and the practice of monitoring what you're doing. And we'll give you resources and they can be used as needed. But knowing that Learning Lab has built some monitoring tools, there'll be a six-month tool. There are regular tools that informs that they will be built into the process. If you want to supplement those with some of these other tools, that's great. But they all fall into the suite of learning and reflecting on what you're doing during the process, making a real formative aspect of evaluation. And really that's the coaching here. But a lot of this is going to be very specific around the measurement piece to hopefully give you some resources that might be useful in your toolbox.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to get into now. So those first couple slides were more theoretical about continuous improvement. And now we want to shift to talking about strategies and different types of evidence that you can use when it comes to monitoring implementation. So in your logic model, you're tracking activities and outputs. And you can also track implementation outcomes. And so all four of these bullets are, specific aspects of your implementation that you might want to track, along with specific types of data collection that you could use to measure. So the first bullet is you might want to track the use or uptake of services. Maybe that's a counselor recommending a particular course or course sequence or degree credential to a student. Maybe you want to track whether students are following up on counselors' recommendations. I'm sure we can talk through many examples in our breakout groups, but you're going to want to track to what extent your services are being used. And the way to do that might be rosters of participants. Like if you have an info session about a particular course or program, recording the dates and type of participation. Someone in my group mentioned like first year experience, research, research events aimed at first year incoming students. Mike mentioned that at Santa Barbara. So that's something that you probably want to be tracking who's participating and when. So the second point you can measure is how the program is being delivered and whether there's fidelity of implementation, basically whether the program is being implemented as you intended in terms of the content and the timing and the frequency. So basically making sure that your project is unfolding in the way that you had planned. Another thing that you can track is satisfaction and usefulness. So to the third point there, surveys or questionnaires in addition to focus groups. And then finally, and this might not be appropriate for all programs, but like a cost benefit analysis. So whether the benefits of participating outweigh the costs. So you can justify the investment that your institutions are making in these programs.
And I just want to point out, I think the second bullet is the hardest one. We're talking about if you want to change the way learning experiences are happening in classrooms, really implementation needs to be observed and then recorded over time. It's a really hard thing to implement, but it might be something that's really worthwhile to do. Maybe you could have some sort of peer evaluation or observation. Whereas some of the other ones are a little bit more feasible to carry out, like surveys, participation rosters, attendance rosters, or just tracking the costs. But I think just want to put the observation on there as something that's important, but it tends to be a little more costly. Sorry, Beth, there's just an interjection.
This is great. Feel free to interject as well. Reno's modeling how you can feel free to interject with a comment or question. Okay, so underlying data. How do we show that we're making an improvement or a change? First, you have to document the baseline. And Reno already touched on this in the first part of the presentation, but this is what was the conditions prior to the implementation of the strategic or institutional change. You can do this through qualitative measures as well as through quantitative measures. So looking at, student outcomes, student characteristics. Maybe for some of you, it's the number of students enrolled in certain majors, credit accumulation in certain major pathways. To the second point, explain the intervention and how it's intended to unfold. So you're doing this in your logic model. I can't remember the term the logic model used, but it's what we would call the activities and the outputs in the logic model that Reno described. And then documenting the contrast case. So that's basically comparing the baseline to post-intervention. And do you see a change on the baseline? So thinking about the baseline before you started. So you have a counterfactual. What would have happened if not for this program? So these are just some concrete ideas to get you thinking, like Reno mentioned, about constant data monitoring throughout rather than at the end reflecting on your outcomes. So these are some more specific examples, some concrete ideas about how you can attach measurement to the thinking in your logic model. And, I don't know to what extent you're familiar with these, but you could have qualitative measures. Maybe for some of you, that's the way the protocol a counselor has for how they introduce different majors to students. Surveys, focus groups. This could be with student populations, with other populations of faculty or staff at the college, like navigators, for example. Observational rubrics. This is what Reno mentioned, documenting classroom experiences. Interim measures of student understanding. Maybe this is midway through a course. I know some of you are introducing new courses. Logs of implementation. So is the process happening as you had designed it to? And then assessments of student learning. I know I don't need to go over that one. We're all familiar with that. Okay, so the final piece here is basically you do all this work to build this understanding. And these are some practical steps for how you would document the continuous improvement process and share it out. So the first piece is, what is the program that you were implementing? Who was it designed to benefit? And then what is the scale? The second point, consider the investment. I think of that as in a broader way too. It's just like, what is the institutional context that you were implementing in? And then disseminating what was learned. So that could be internal to your own institution, sharing between other grantees in Learning Lab, and also sharing your findings more widely to the scholarly community. So the main takeaway and the punchline from this whole section of slides is we're talking here about feedback loops with how you want to continuously, as you go through the next phase, through the next year of your work, what kind of measurement tools can you design and build into your process so you can collect data about this as it's happening. So in the next set of breakout groups, we're going to go back to our same groups and talk for 20 minutes. And we're going to talk about whether you currently have a process for collecting data, what measures you're using, what level they are, like is it student, is it faculty, are they qualitative, are they quantitative? And if you don't have that, what are some of the challenges you're facing? Maybe you're having trouble establishing a baseline. And I know we have some more experienced folks who can also share how they're confronting these challenges.
And one last thing I'd want to know before we go into the breakout groups is a note that some of our Learning Lab colleagues have raised on the chat is that we're capturing a lot of these conversation threads. We aren't recording the breakouts, but facilitators are taking notes. And I do think we're all going to put our heads together, and we are going to there is a repository of tools and resources from previous grantees that we can bring in and can share out with this group of data science grantees to support you as you raise things. So as you bring up these discussions, or if there are tools or things you're seeking, please note them. Please ask the facilitator to note them. And our WestEd and Learning Lab team will be able to push back out with some follow-up to continue to support you in your work. So know that there are lessons learned from previous grantees. There are observational tools. There are student surveys that might be valuable or viable to your work. So feel free to lay it out in these conversations, and the facilitators can capture them and we can follow up as a group.
Welcome back, everyone. I trust that you all had really great conversations in your breakout groups. I know ours was really rich with sharing tips and also needs. And as you can tell, we didn't have, share back time at the end of our breakout rooms. And so we did want to leave a little time for that now, either to share something that you learned or questions that you have based on the entire presentation or from your breakout groups. Questions, comments, or reflections, we'd love to hear them.
Elizabeth, I had one that I wanted to just share out of something that I really want to encourage, and it felt great in the discussion group was, you're forming a court of grantees and there's space to share with each other, talk with each other. And that was going on in my group with strategies, with, things that people are doing, what they found effective. And these are, of course, the beginning stages, but that's very helpful to do. And so I appreciated hearing that.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, something that came up in our group, and throughout this webinar, we've talked about what the elements of program evaluation and building a common language and understanding around that. And in our group, it came up that there's not necessarily a common understanding of what data science is and how that can be limiting and challenging. And folks had different ideas for how they're developing materials for different, maybe will develop or are developing materials at different levels. Student facing, counselor facing, etc. So stay tuned. As Reno said, we'd love to push out, or Beth, I think it was Beth. We're going to push out things that we've learned. We love learning from you about your needs and want to help your evaluation, your project as much as we can.
Yeah, we'll be partners throughout the project as an external partner with the Learning Lab and with you guys. And I think something that came up in our group was the value of having sort of a discussion forum or a monthly community practice for faculty to kind of get together and then opposite opportunity for the grant leaders to talk with the faculty and share information about maybe what students are saying, but also to hear how faculty are grappling with challenges. So building communities of practice into the work to learn together as it's going might be an effective sort of structure to build. That kind of came out in our discussion group, but I understand how early it is. So it's just a lot of this is very early thinking as you guys embarked on these paths. And with that, we can thank you. Our portion is done, but I think that Jamie and others will jump in. I think they want to survey folks to get some feedback on how today went. From our perspective as an evaluation partner, we want to do these webinars about every 6 months. We'll come back. They will likely be focused on hopefully topics that are relevant to your work as you go through. And we'll also be having sort of office hours over time, generally to have more individualized discussions. So stay tuned for the scheduling of those. But we're over a couple of years, we're going to be working with the group. So we're very excited about that. We want to thank everyone. Our contact information is on the screen here, and we are very amenable to folks reaching out with questions or feedback.
Wonderful. Thank you, WestEd, for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And in the spirit of evaluation, yes, please do fill out our survey. Lily dropped that in the chat. Thanks, Lily, for doing that. Next steps, we'll keep it short and sweet. We're going to send out, as I mentioned, the recording The slides will also share information about WestEd's upcoming office hours for some technical assistance. If that's interesting to you, let us know. But here's 3 minutes back to your day. We'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you.